I'm Suhas Naik. This is book review for Imperial Hygiene, a critical history of colonialism, nationalism, and public health. Author of this book is Alison Bashford. This book was published by Palgrave School at January 2004. Introduction. Author of this book, Alison Bashford, is Professor of History in University of Sydney. Her innovative study is a cultural history of borders, hygiene, and race. This book is about foreign bodies from Victorian vaccines to the pathologized interwar immigrant, from smallpox quarantine to the leper colony, from sexual hygiene to national hygiene to racial hygiene. Taking British colonialism and White Australia as case studies, the book examines the enclosures, boundaries, and borders which were objects and means of public health, as well as colonial, national, and racial administration between 1850 and 1950. If public health was in part about segregation of deceased from the clean, the fit from the unfit, the immune from the vulnerable, so was a race segregative practice in modern period. The Imperial Hygiene shows how colonial management of race divided with public health into new boundaries of rule, into racialized cordon sanitaries. Summary. This book contains 7 chapters. The first 4 chapters are organized around specific disease traits like smallpox, tuberculosis, and leprosy, while the subsequent 3 chapters concentrate on quarantine, hygiene, and White Australia policy, as well as sexual hygiene and population policy. What unites the book, Bashford argues, is the idea of hygiene. In Australia, from late 19th century, hygiene came to be personal and political mission. It was, as Alison Bashford's note, a noun that spawned even more adjectives which connected the bodily and the personal to larger government projects like sex hygiene, domestic hygiene, social hygiene, national hygiene, moral hygiene, tropical hygiene, maternal hygiene, racial hygiene, international hygiene, and more. The connection between penology and public health was an important aspect of constructing spaces and boundaries of public health in British colonies. Quarantine stations were places of isolation, a kind of cordon sanitaire that separated the clean from the unclean. The compulsory character of public health became obvious by presence of public police as agents of health. They help to enforce measures like monitoring individuals for vaccination and quarantine near railroad stations. Vaccination campaigns to control infectious disease granted corrosive power to public health authorities as well as laid the basis for medical statistics. The cooperation of Victorian philanthropic organizations and the colonial state bureaucracy demonstrate that public health was national importance. Vaccination became important part of global network, and the nucleus of this global network was national vaccine establishment in London. But there was another existed network like in 1880s, New South Wales obtained dispatches of calf limb from India, which according to author represented a more important line of communication than that between London and Australia. The government of Bombay gave more detailed information of vaccination procedures. However, Stolberg mentioned that author did not focus it deeply on did India represent a prototype in the carding of anthropological topographies of foreign bodies. For Bashford, health and racial management was tightly related to each other in the formation of Australian nation. In terms of whiteness, she notes that in 1901, when Commonwealth of Australia came into being by joining the 6 colonies, the only public health power that was constitutionally granted to the Commonwealth was that maritime quarantine. According to quarantine policy of outsiders and Aboriginals was treated as deceased. As Bashford notes that quarantine created the geobody of 20th century Australian nation. She claims that Australian nationalism and public health policy predicted on ideas of whiteness and purity respectively, informed and shaped each other substantially. She goes on to argue that racial logic informing quarantine measures continued to be reflected in the immigration policy of nation even in the 20th century, as said by Khalid. Author delivers a concise cultural history of blurring borders, hygiene and races in Australia from 1850 to 1950. In early 20th century, public health bureaucrat once put it, imperial cleanliness is development of sanitation, colonizing by means of known laws of cleanliness rather than by military force. Bashford is right in arguing that colonialism or imperialism developed the boundaries of rule were not only fixed by military inventions but also by administrative guidelines of hygiene that resulted in a segregation of disease from the clean and the eugenic segregation of the fit from the unfit in Australia, as said by Stolberg. She wrote about Comston, who wrote thought in development of bureaucracies of public health not only in Australia but in North America, France and Britain, was influential in the shaping of public health and national schemes of hygiene over the first half of the 20th century. Comston's extraordinary career also consolidated of new federal Australian policy structure and the development of independent Australian relations with other sovereign nations, as well as international bodies like the League of Nations Health Committee and Rockefeller Foundation. She pinpointed this top policies, politics and rulers of that time, and she wrote in Comston's hand, as well as other experts driven by connections between health, colonialism and nation and government health and hygiene were radially linked to nationalism and national efficiency. Conclusion. In summary, Bashford delivers a very innovative study on colonial medicine in the global context of nationalism, but Stolberg identifies is somewhat to that. Book is traditional in its analysis of bureaucratic mechanism of Australia's public health. Khalid says author argument appears to be preconceived and historical. Data aims to support hypotheses. The use of social sciences jargon and convoluted writing style do not make for an easy read. Imperial hygiene might disappoint those seeking a social history of these disease epidemics and social anxieties, but it is an important contribution to growing literature that examines the link between public health and colonialism and medicine and nationalism.